weak and starving for days. A man couldn't stand it and jumped forward. HFY Jonas awoke to the familiar sound of his stomach growling, a painful reminder of how long he had been trapped on this forsaken planet. His body was weak, skin pale and thin from the days without proper food. The sky above was an endless canvas of dark, swirling clouds, and the air carried a pungent scent, decay and alien dust mixing with the toxic fumes from the planet's broken atmosphere. His only company was the faint, eerie whisper of wind as it passed through the broken ruins of what was once a thriving city. He wiped his brow, brushing away the sweat mixed with grime, his fingers shaking slightly. His mind had begun to dull from hunger. The days blurred together, each one feeling like a never-ending cycle of suffering. He had tried to stay focused, to hold on to hope, but that was growing harder with each passing hour. Jonas had been a soldier, a peacekeeper sent to this planet on a mission to broker a deal between two warring alien factions. His team, a small group of humans, had landed hoping to resolve a conflict that had dragged on for centuries. But they had underestimated the hostilities of the alien race, the Vaxar, an insectoid species that viewed humans with disdain. They had ambushed Jonas and his team the moment they touched down, and in the chaos of the battle, most of his comrades had fallen. The last thing Jonas had remembered before being knocked unconscious was the face of his commander, a woman named Serafina, her eyes wide with terror as she was taken by the Vaxar soldiers. When Jonas regained consciousness, he found himself alone, scattered debris from the wreckage of their transport ship scattered around him. His limbs ached, his head throbbed, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The planet, which had once seemed so alive, was now nothing more than a graveyard of broken structures and dead technologies. The air was too thin, the gravity slightly higher than Earth's, making each step more exhausting than the last. For days, Jonas had searched for food or water, finding only broken machinery and the remains of what seemed like an ancient alien civilization. There were no signs of life, not the kind he was used to anyway. The native creatures of the planet were either too dangerous or too elusive to catch. The only thing Jonas could find were berries, small, red, and shriveled, bitter and sour, hardly enough to sustain him. His stomach gnawed at him, a constant, relentless ache that refused to be ignored. It was getting harder to stay awake. Every time he closed his eyes, the darkness felt closer, colder. His body screamed for nourishment, but the hunger was so deep, it felt like it was consuming him from the inside. Jonas stumbled forward through the ruins, his boots crunching on the brittle ground. He was in a part of the city that looked ancient, the buildings tall and made of strange materials that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Some of them were still standing, though cracked and eroded by time. It was as if the planet had been abandoned long before the Vaxar ever set foot on it. He had a vague sense of direction, moving toward what appeared to be a control center. From the data his team had gathered before the attack, this structure had been a hub for the alien species that once lived here. The hope was that if he could access any of the old systems, he might find something, anything, that could help him escape. A ship, a working communication system, something that could bring him back home. As he reached the center of the city, Jonas collapsed against a wall. His vision swam and his hands trembled as he pulled himself up again. There was a faint humming noise coming from the building's interior, a sound unlike anything Jonas had heard since the crash. His heart skipped a beat. Was it a trap? Were the Vaxar closing in? But as he pushed through the door, the sight that greeted him was nothing like he expected. Inside the building was a large chamber, its walls lined with strange alien technology. In the center of the room sat a large, cylindrical structure, glowing faintly with a blue light. It looked like some kind of engine or power core, humming with an energy that felt almost alive. Jonas's breath hitched. This was it. This was what he had been searching for. This was his chance to escape, but his body was failing him. He could barely stand, let alone navigate the complex systems within the chamber. He staggered toward the central structure, his mind swimming as he tried to make sense of the alien controls. His hands hovered over the panels, but his vision was blurring, and the weakness in his body made it impossible to focus. He stumbled, his knees buckling, and he barely managed to catch himself on the edge of a console. His mind screamed for him to stay awake, to keep moving forward, but his body was shutting down. "Please," he whispered under his breath, his voice hoarse. "I can't die here, I can't." Jonas knew he couldn't afford to lose consciousness. If he did, the Vaxar would find him and there would be no escape. But as the pain in his body grew unbearable, the thought of lying down and letting the darkness take him was tempting. He couldn't. He couldn't give up, not when there was still a chance. With one final push, Jonas reached out for the nearest console. His fingers brushed against the controls, and to his surprise, the chamber's lights flickered and the humming grew louder. Something had activated. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope in his chest. The chamber seemed to respond to him, as if sensing his desperation. But Jonas could barely comprehend what was happening. His eyes were closing, his breathing shallow and erratic. Still, he forced himself to focus. His mind, though clouded by hunger and fatigue, recognized a pattern in the alien symbols. This wasn't just a control panel, it was a command system. If he could just activate it, he could get the power running, start the ship's engines, and... A sharp pain shot through his head, cutting off his thoughts. He fell to the ground, unable to keep his balance any longer. The cold, unforgiving floor pressed against his cheek, and for a moment Jonas wondered if this was how it would end. Alone, starving, forgotten. But then something inside him stirred, a deep primal instinct that would not let him die here. Not like this. Jonas's eyes fluttered open. The faint blue light from the chamber's core glowed brighter now, almost pulsing with life. It was as if the ship, no, the technology, was calling to him, urging him to keep going. He didn't have the strength to make it happen, but something in his soul refused to give in. "I won't die," Jonas muttered through gritted teeth, his hands scraping against the ground as he pulled himself back up. The light in the chamber flickered once again, almost in recognition. Jonas's mind was barely holding on, but his will to survive burned brighter than ever. Somehow he knew this was his only chance. He had to keep going. Jonas's fingers hovered over the control panel, and though he could barely hold himself up, his hand slid toward the glowing interface. His heart raced as his finger pressed against the surface. Nothing happened at first, but then slowly the ship's hum deepened and a distant mechanical sound echoed through the chamber. Jonas could hear the whir of the ship's systems coming to life. It was working. He had done it. But the question was, would it be enough? Jonas didn't know, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stop now. Jonas struggled to stay awake, his mind clouded by hunger and exhaustion. His fingers hovered over the alien control panel, desperately trying to make sense of the strange symbols that covered its surface. The blue light from the chamber's core flickered, its soft hum filling the air as Jonas's body refused to cooperate. His legs were weak, barely able to hold him up, and his arms trembled as he fought to keep his hands steady. The alien technology around him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The design was sleek, organic in appearance, as though it had grown rather than been built. Every surface seemed to pulse with energy, as if alive. It was as though the ship was waiting for something. Or someone. Jonas couldn't make sense of it, but deep down, he knew that this was his only chance. If he failed, he would die here alone, just another casualty of an alien war he had no part in. If he succeeded, he might just make it out alive. His breathing was shallow, each inhalation sending a sharp pain through his chest. The hunger gnawed at him, the emptiness in his stomach a constant reminder of how long he had gone without food. But despite the pain, despite the overwhelming urge to collapse, Jonas forced himself to focus. His fingers brushed over the controls once more, this time pressing down with more determination. A low, mechanical sound echoed through the chamber, and for a moment Jonas thought he had failed. But then the ship's hum grew louder and the blue light brightened, as though the ship itself was awakening from a long slumber. Jonas's heart raced. He didn't know how, but something was happening. The ship was responding to him, reacting to his touch. His body screamed for rest, but he pushed through the fatigue, each second bringing him closer to something that could change his fate. The chamber seemed to come alive as the ship's systems powered up. The walls shifted, opening to reveal hidden passages, and the air around Jonas grew warmer, less oppressive. He could feel the faint pulse of energy in the air, and it filled him with a strange sense of hope. Maybe this ship could get him out of here, maybe it could take him back to Earth. But the momentary relief was short-lived. A sudden, sharp noise echoed from the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Vaxar. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. The alien soldiers were coming. They had tracked him, and now they were closing in. In a panic, Jonas glanced around the chamber, searching for a way to escape. But there was no time. The Vaxar were too close. His body, drained of strength, felt as though it were made of lead. Every movement took effort, every breath was a struggle. The ship, still in the early stages of activation, wouldn't be ready to fly for several more hours, if it could even fly at all. Jonas had no choice but to hide. He stumbled toward the far side of the chamber, ducking behind a large, cylindrical structure. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat sending a shockwave of pain through his body. He pressed himself against the cold metal, holding his breath as the sound of the Vaxar soldiers grew louder. The floor beneath him trembled as they approached, their voices low and guttural, their steps heavy. Jonas knew that if they found him, he wouldn't survive. The Vaxar were ruthless, and they would not hesitate to kill him. He had to stay hidden to stay alive. But even as he cowered in the darkness, his mind kept racing. The ship had come to life, but was it enough to get him out? Was there a way to activate its systems before the Vaxar found him? The thought of waiting was unbearable. He couldn't just sit there and let them capture him again. But what else could he do? The footsteps stopped. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. He could hear the Vaxar speaking, their voices muffled by the thick walls of the chamber. They were close, too close. He knew that if they entered the chamber, they would see him and there would be no escape. He had to act. With a deep breath, Jonas forced himself to his feet. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he couldn't afford to stay hidden any longer. He had no choice but to take a chance. He staggered back toward the control panel, ignoring the dizzying wave of nausea that hit him. His hands were shaking, his legs unsteady, but he reached for the console again, determined to make the ship work. His fingers pressed the glowing symbols, and this time there was no hesitation. The ship responded immediately, its systems whirring to life with greater intensity. The walls vibrated, the energy within the chamber rising. Jonas's heart raced, the sound of the Vaxar's footsteps growing louder as they neared. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Suddenly, the room filled with a blinding light, and Jonas was thrown back as the ship's energy surged forward, enveloping the entire chamber in a brilliant blue glow. The Vaxar soldiers outside hesitated, their voices rising in confusion and alarm. Jonas's eyes were wide with disbelief. The ship had activated itself, but it wasn't just a small system flickering to life. The entire structure was waking up, and it was responding to him. Before he could fully process what was happening, the ship began to move. The walls shifted, and the ground beneath him trembled as the chamber's ceiling opened, revealing the dark sky above. The air pressure changed, and Jonas gasped as the atmosphere shifted, becoming less oppressive, less toxic. The ship was lifting off the ground. Jonas's heart raced as he stumbled to his feet, a wave of relief washing over him. He had done it. He had somehow activated the ship. But as the craft ascended into the sky, Jonas's mind was still reeling. The Vaxar would not give up easily. They would be on his tail, hunting him down. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. He needed to get control of the ship to make sure it was heading in the right direction. But his strength was fading and his vision blurred. The hunger and exhaustion were taking their toll, but Jonas pushed forward, his mind focused on survival. The ship's cockpit was located at the front of the chamber, and Jonas staggered toward it, each step feeling like an eternity. The energy from the ship seemed to be coursing through him, giving him just enough strength to keep moving. But his body was failing him. He needed to rest, to eat, to regain his strength. But there was no time, not now. When he finally reached the cockpit, Jonas was greeted by a strange, unfamiliar interface. The controls were unlike anything he had seen before, but he could sense that the ship was responding to his touch. It was as if the technology recognized him, or perhaps it was his desperation that made the ship react. He didn't know and he didn't care. He just needed to get away. He settled into the seat, his hands shaking as he grasped the controls. The ship hummed beneath him, its systems fully powered now. Jonas's fingers moved over the strange symbols, and slowly the ship began to pick up speed. He was leaving the planet, leaving the ruins, leaving the Vaxar behind. But even as the ship ascended higher into the atmosphere, Jonas knew that the danger wasn't over. The Vaxar would follow, and they would stop at nothing to capture him. The thought of them closing in made Jonas's blood run cold. He couldn't let them catch him. Not after everything he had been through. As the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere, Jonas took a shaky breath. He was free, at least for now. The stars were vast, stretching out before him like a sea of possibilities. But despite the sense of freedom, Jonas knew that this was only the beginning. His escape was only temporary. The Vaxar would hunt him, and he would need to be ready for whatever came next. For now, though, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had survived. Against all odds, he had survived. Jonas sat in the cockpit, his body slumped in the seat, too exhausted to do anything but hold on. The ship was moving now, climbing higher into the sky, and the rumbling of its engines seemed to echo through his body. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, powerful, alive, yet strangely comforting. But even as the ship soared into the dark void of space, his mind remained clouded. He was free for now, but he knew the fight wasn't over. The Vaxar were still out there, and they would come for him. His vision blurred, and he felt his eyelids growing heavy. The hunger, the exhaustion, the pain in his body, it was all catching up to him. He hadn't eaten in days, and his body had been pushed to its limits. His hands were trembling, and his thoughts were becoming sluggish. He could barely keep his head up, let alone fly the ship. But despite the overwhelming fatigue, Jonas knew he couldn't stop. He couldn't give in. The ship had given him a chance, but he had to make sure he didn't waste it. He needed to get out of the Vaxar's reach, to put as much distance between them as possible before they noticed his escape. With shaky hands, he gripped the controls again. The ship responded to his touch, its engines roaring as it accelerated. The planet below became a distant blur, shrinking rapidly as Jonas pushed the ship into high-speed flight. His heart raced, but he kept his focus on the controls, knowing that the slightest mistake could send him plummeting back down to the surface. But his focus was wavering. His eyelids fluttered and his head felt heavy. The hunger gnawed at him, a constant, painful reminder of how long he had been without food. His body screamed for rest, but he couldn't afford it. Not now. The ship's systems, still unfamiliar to him, seemed to be working on their own, adjusting for his lack of experience. The controls, while strange, responded to his touch with an eerie precision, as though the ship itself had a mind of its own. It wasn't fully under his control, not yet, but it was enough to keep him moving. For now, that was all that mattered. Jonas's mind was foggy, and his body was beginning to betray him. The hunger, the cold, the exhaustion, it was all too much. His hands slipped from the controls, and he felt himself falling forward, his body too weak to keep upright. But before he could hit the floor, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems adjusted again, and the seat beneath him shifted, locking him into place. It was as if the ship had anticipated his fall and was holding him up, keeping him alive long enough to keep flying. Jonas let out a weak, exhausted laugh. It was almost as if the ship cared about him, like it was looking out for him. The thought was absurd, but in his current state, it was comforting. He closed his eyes for just a moment, allowing himself to rest. He could feel the vibrations of the ship beneath him, the steady hum of its engines, and it lulled him into a sense of security. But the moment his eyes closed, the memories of the Vaxar came flooding back. He could still see their insectoid faces, their eyes full of malice. He could still hear their voices, cold and cruel, as they hunted down his comrades. He could still hear Serafina's screams as she was dragged away. The guilt hit him like a wave. He should have been able to protect them. He should have done more. But instead, he had been too slow, too weak, and now he was alone, floating in a strange ship, heading into the unknown. The thought was too much to bear, and Jonas forced himself to push it aside. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. He had to focus on the present. The Vaxar would be looking for him, and they would stop at nothing to bring him back. He had to keep moving. He had to survive. The ship's voice, a calm, mechanical tone, suddenly cut through the silence, startling Jonas. Course trajectory confirmed. Navigating to nearest star system. Jonas blinked, confused. The ship was speaking to him, but he hadn't activated any communication system. How had it known what he wanted? Ship, Jonas said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. How? How did you know where I wanted to go? Course trajectory set, the ship replied, its voice flat and emotionless. Nearest star system identified, distance, 2 days at current speed. Jonas frowned, unsure of what to make of the ship's response. Had it been programmed to respond to his thoughts, to his desires? He didn't know, but he didn't have the strength to figure it out. All he knew was that it had taken him away from the planet, away from the Vaxar. That was all that mattered. He glanced at the ship's display, watching as the stars in the distance grew brighter, the vastness of space unfolding before him. The sight was breathtaking. For a moment he forgot about the hunger, the exhaustion, the pain. For a moment, he allowed himself to marvel at the beauty of it all. He was flying through the stars, leaving the planet, leaving the Vaxar behind. He was free. But then, as if to remind him that nothing was ever that simple, a sudden alarm blared from the ship's control panel. The sound was deafening, a harsh, shrill warning that pierced through his thoughts. Jonas's heart skipped a beat as his mind snapped back to reality. He looked at the display, his vision swimming with fatigue. The screen showed several red blips, each one moving toward him at an alarming speed. The Vaxar were coming. Jonas's blood ran cold. They had found him. He had been hoping for a moment of peace, a moment to catch his breath, but it seemed like the universe had other plans. The Vaxar were closing in, and they were fast. The ship's systems began to react to the incoming threat, shifting into evasive maneuvers. Jonas's hands flew to the controls, but his body was too weak to keep up. His vision blurred, and his thoughts became jumbled as the ship's alarms blared louder, urging him to act. He didn't have the strength to fight back, to outmaneuver the Vaxar, but the ship wasn't waiting for him to make a decision. It had already taken control. Jonas gripped the armrests of the seat, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship's movements were fast, too fast for him to process. It twisted and turned, darting through space with an agility that Jonas couldn't have imagined. The Vaxar ships were in pursuit, their weapons charged and ready, but the ship's defenses activated, sending out bursts of energy that knocked the enemy vessels off course. For a moment, Jonas thought they might make it. The ship was powerful, far more advanced than anything he had ever seen, but the Vaxar were relentless. They regrouped quickly, their ships firing in unison. The first blast hit the ship's shields, sending a shockwave through the cockpit. Jonas felt his body jerk forward as the impact rattled the entire craft. The ship's systems adjusted again, but Jonas's mind was growing hazy. His body couldn't take much more. The hunger, the exhaustion, the pain, it was all too much. He couldn't keep up with the ship's movements. He couldn't keep his focus on the fight. But just as the Vaxar were about to close in, something changed. The ship surged forward, breaking through the enemy's line of fire. Jonas's heart raced as the ship entered a strange, dark space, a void filled with glowing energy that seemed to pulse with life. The Vaxar hesitated, unsure of what to do, and Jonas felt the ship's momentum slow. The ship's systems went quiet, the alarms silencing as the craft entered this strange new region of space. Jonas's vision faded, and he finally allowed himself to relax. He had made it this far. Now all he could do was wait. Jonas awoke with a sharp gasp, his eyes flying open to the soft glow of the ship's interior. He felt disoriented, as if the world around him had shifted while he slept. His body ached from exhaustion, and his mind was foggy from the hunger and the constant strain of the past few days. He blinked, trying to focus, and saw the ship's display flicker to life, showing the stars outside. The strange void of space still surrounded him, the ship floating peacefully in what felt like an endless sea of darkness. The energy that had filled the cockpit earlier had dissipated, leaving an eerie calm. For a moment, Jonas thought the Vaxar had given up, that they had lost his trail. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The Vaxar were relentless. They would keep coming. Jonas sat up slowly, his head spinning from the movement. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him just how long it had been since he had last eaten. The hunger had been gnawing at him ever since he'd been stranded, but now it felt more urgent, more painful. He needed food. He needed strength. The ship's systems beeped softly, and the voice, a calm, mechanical tone, spoke again. "Proximity alert. Incoming vessel detected." Jonas stiffened, his heart pounding in his chest. The Vaxar were back. They had found him. The ship's display flashed with the image of a distant vessel, growing larger on the screen. It was unmistakable. An enemy ship, sleek and menacing, the markings of the Vaxar emblazoned on its hull. Jonas could feel the cold sweat on his forehead as he tried to focus on the controls, but his body was still weak, his muscles sore from the strain of the escape. "Warning, hostile vessel approaching. Distance, 5 minutes." He had no choice. He couldn't outrun them, not in his current condition. The ship was fast, but the Vaxar ships were faster, and Jonas was too weak to fight. He had to think of something, anything, to survive. His fingers trembled as he reached for the controls. The ship's interface was still unfamiliar, the alien technology too complex for him to fully understand. But he had no time to waste. He needed to do something, anything. "Ship," he said hoarsely, his voice barely above a whisper, "can you help me?" There was a brief pause as if the ship was processing his words. Then the voice returned, calm and impersonal. Assistance available, initiating evasive maneuvers. Before Jonas could react, the ship lurched forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated. The stars outside blurred as the ship shot into motion, its speed increasing with every passing second. Jonas gripped the seat, his body thrown back against the restraints as the ship twisted and turned, weaving through space like a darting fish in a turbulent ocean. The Vaxar ship was closing in, its weapons primed and ready to fire. Jonas could see it clearly now, the ship's sleek black hull cutting through the stars like a predator stalking its prey. He could feel the fear building inside him, but he forced himself to focus. The ship had given him a chance to escape before. He had to trust it now. The ship's engines whined as it veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts from the Vaxar vessel. The blast hit the space around them, sending a ripple of shockwaves that made Jonas's head spin. He could feel the ship's shields absorb the impact, but the force still rattled him to the core. "Warning," the ship's voice said again. "Shields at 45%. Recommend immediate evasive action." Jonas's heart raced as he slammed his hands onto the controls, trying to direct the ship in a way that would outmaneuver the Vaxar. He was too weak to think clearly, his body racked with hunger and fatigue, but he couldn't give up. Not now. The ship's systems guided him through a series of sharp turns and dives, twisting and spinning in ways that would have been impossible for any human pilot. It was as if the ship itself was alive, responding to Jonas's faintest command. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath came in ragged gasps as he fought to stay focused. Another blast from the Vaxar ship shook the ship's hull, and Jonas felt himself losing control. The ship began to spiral, its trajectory throwing him off balance. He could hear the alarms blaring, the ship's systems warning him of an impending collision. Just when Jonas thought he might be done for, the ship's voice came through again. Energy surge detected, activating evasive jump sequence. Before Jonas could comprehend what was happening, the ship jolted forward with a violent force, and the stars outside twisted and warped into streaks of light. It felt like the entire universe was spinning around him, and for a moment, Jonas thought he might lose consciousness. The ship's jump took them far from the Vaxar vessel, and the violent movement stopped as quickly as it had begun. Jonas gasped, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he tried to steady himself in the seat. The ship had jumped, some kind of advanced, faster-than-light travel that had gotten them out of immediate danger. The cockpit was silent, the alarms quiet for the first time in what felt like hours. Jonas looked at the display. The Vaxar ship was gone, lost in the vastness of space. They had escaped, for now, but Jonas knew that the Vaxar wouldn't stop. They would keep searching, keep hunting, and they would eventually catch up. He had no way of knowing how long they had before the Vaxar were back on their tail. "Where are we?" Jonas asked, his voice hoarse. "Location unknown," the ship replied, its voice still calm. "Coordinates unclear. Proximity to nearby star system, 5 days. 5 days." That was all the ship could tell him. Jonas's mind raced. 5 days, that was an eternity. Would he survive that long? He didn't know. His body felt weak and his hunger was unbearable. The ship had given him a chance to escape, but he wasn't sure if he could hold on for 5 more days. Jonas closed his eyes, trying to gather what little strength he had left. He had to think, had to come up with a plan. The ship was still functional, and it had saved him once. He had to hope that it would save him again. His stomach growled loudly, the sound echoing through the cockpit. He grimaced, clutching his abdomen as the hunger gnawed at him. There was nothing here, no food, no supplies. He was alone in the dark with nothing but the strange alien ship and the vast expanse of space to keep him company. He glanced at the ship's control panel, his mind still foggy, but he knew he couldn't give up. Not now. There had to be something. There had to be a way to survive. The ship had saved him before, it could save him again. The hunger was unbearable. Jonas's body was on the edge of collapse, but his will to survive was stronger. He couldn't let himself die here, alone in space, with nothing but the stars to witness his end. With a deep breath, Jonas stood up, his legs unsteady beneath him, and made his way toward the back of the ship. There had to be something, any kind of supply, anything that could help him make it through the next few days. As he moved through the narrow corridors, his fingers brushed against the walls, still cold to the touch, yet oddly comforting. The ship seemed to hum beneath his feet as though it were alive. Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was more than just a vessel. It was something else, something that had its own intelligence, its own purpose. But what was that purpose, and why had it chosen him? His mind raced with questions, but for now there was no time to answer them. His priority was simple: survival. He needed food. He needed to find a way to stay alive long enough to reach a safe place. The corridors twisted and turned, and Jonas's body screamed in protest as he pushed forward. His vision blurred, but he refused to stop. He wouldn't give up, not now. Not after everything he had been through. Jonas stumbled through the ship's narrow corridors, his steps unsteady and slow. His body was on the brink of collapse, exhausted, starving, and weak from the days of fighting for survival. He had been so close to giving up, to surrendering to the endless darkness of space. But something inside him refused to let go. He had escaped the Vaxar, but the battle wasn't over yet. He had to survive. He had to keep going. The ship, still humming with its strange energy, seemed to guide him, its walls vibrating with an almost living presence. Jonas didn't know what to make of it. Was it sentient? Or was it just another piece of technology, something he couldn't begin to understand? For now, it didn't matter. All he cared about was finding food, finding something to keep him going. He passed by more of the ship's chambers, each one filled with alien technology that seemed to shift and change as he walked. The walls, smooth and metallic, glowed faintly in the dim light. He had no idea how to operate any of it. The ship had guided him this far, but now he was on his own. He had to figure out the rest. His stomach growled loudly, a reminder of the hunger that was tearing at him from the inside. It felt like a constant ache, a gnawing void that nothing could fill. He was dizzy, his mind clouded by the emptiness inside him. But he couldn't stop, not yet. He reached a door at the end of the corridor, one that seemed different from the others. It was larger, more imposing, and the energy emanating from it was stronger. As he approached, the door slid open without him having to touch anything. The room inside was dimly lit, with soft blue light spilling from a strange, glowing pod in the center. Jonas felt a pull, an almost magnetic force drawing him toward it. He staggered forward, the last of his strength drained as he neared the pod. The light from within seemed to flicker, almost as if it were reacting to his presence. As he got closer, he saw that the pod wasn't just glowing, it was alive. The surface was smooth and pulsing, and as Jonas reached out to touch it, the light grew brighter. It was as though the ship itself had been waiting for him, calling him to this very spot. He hesitated for a moment before placing his hand on the surface of the pod. A strange warmth spread through his fingertips, and for a brief second he thought he heard a whisper in his mind, soft and unintelligible, like the hum of the ship itself. The pod seemed to react to his touch, its surface shifting and rippling like water. Jonas's heart skipped a beat as a compartment opened in the center, revealing a small, transparent container filled with a glowing, liquid substance. It looked like nothing he had ever seen before. He could feel the hunger in his gut intensifying, and without thinking he reached for the container. The moment his fingers closed around it, the pod's light dimmed and the room fell silent. He stared at the glowing liquid, unsure of what it was, but his body didn't care. He was desperate. He had no choice. Jonas tilted the container back and drank the strange liquid, his throat burning as it passed. It was unlike anything he had ever tasted, sweet and bitter at the same time, with a coolness that spread through his chest, settling like ice. His body jerked as the liquid hit his stomach, but then something incredible happened. The hunger that had gnawed at him for so long began to fade. The emptiness in his gut filled, replaced by a warm, steady energy that flowed through his veins. The dizziness that had plagued him lifted and his mind cleared. He could think again, he could breathe again. Jonas stood there in awe of what had just happened. His body felt different, stronger, more alive. The ship, whatever it was, had given him something that had restored him in ways he couldn't explain. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He had to keep moving. The Vaxar were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had found him. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden hum of the ship's systems. The voice, calm and distant, filled the air once more. "Incoming vessel detected. Hostile. Distance 4 minutes." Jonas's heart skipped a beat. The Vaxar were back. He had no time to waste. The ship's display flickered to life, showing the image of the approaching Vaxar vessel. It was closing in fast, faster than before. The ship had given him a brief reprieve, but now it seemed that the battle was far from over. Jonas rushed toward the cockpit. his body moving more easily now, the energy from the mysterious liquid still coursing through him. He reached the controls, his fingers flying over the interface, trying to make sense of it. But the ship seemed to know what he wanted. The moment he touched the controls, the ship's systems came alive, its engines roaring to life, and the vessel surged forward. The stars outside blurred as the ship picked up speed, its trajectory shifting rapidly as it veered away from the incoming Vaxar ship. Jonas's hands shook slightly, but his mind was sharp now. He could think clearly. He could make decisions. The ship's voice spoke again, this time more urgently. "Shields at 60%, incoming fire detected." Jonas gritted his teeth as the first blast from the Vaxar vessel hit the ship's shields. The entire craft shuddered, and Jonas could feel the impact reverberate through his bones. He quickly adjusted the ship's course, veering sharply to the left to avoid the next blast. Another wave of fire hit the shields, and this time the ship groaned under the strain. Jonas cursed under his breath. He couldn't keep this up forever. The Vaxar were relentless, and he was running out of time. He had to find a way to shake them off. The ship's display showed another blip on the radar, another Vaxar ship, this one smaller but still dangerous. They were closing in from behind. Jonas's mind raced. He needed to think of something, and fast. He glanced at the ship's control panel, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar symbols. Then something caught his attention. A series of buttons, each one labeled with strange alien markings. He didn't know what they meant, but one of them seemed to stand out. It was glowing faintly, as if it were calling to him. Without thinking, Jonas pressed it. The ship jolted forward with an incredible burst of speed, shooting out of the path of the Vaxar ships. Jonas felt the pressure push him back into his seat as the ship rocketed through space, faster than he had ever thought possible. The Vaxar vessels followed, but they were slower. The ship's unexpected jump in speed left them trailing behind. Jonas didn't know how long the ship could keep up the pace, but he couldn't stop now. He had to use the time he had gained to get as far away as possible. The stars outside became streaks of light as the ship continued its rapid ascent through space. Jonas's heart raced, but for the first time in days he felt hope. The ship had given him the strength he needed. It had given him a chance. But the Vaxar wouldn't give up. They would find him again, and Jonas knew that eventually he would have to face them. For now, though, the ship's sudden burst of speed had bought him time. He looked down at the control panel, his fingers still gripping the interface, and he wondered where he was going. Was there a safe place, or was he simply running from the inevitable? For the first time in what felt like forever, Jonas allowed himself a moment to breathe. He had escaped, at least for now. The ship, whatever it was, had given him a chance. He wasn't done yet. He wouldn't give up, not until he found a way to end this.